Thanks for coming out and watching the oxymoronic Reddit Professional Show, where I showcase the best and worst of the internet. Here I comment on brilliant and hilarious comment chains regarding dumb shit on the internet for you to enjoy. Make sure to subscribe, hit the little bell button so that you get notifications every time we come up with a new video. Enjoy this week's show.
Misconceptions about insurance and general ignorance being spread regarding the riots. The biggest I see, particularly with the COVID situation, is that any time an insurance company doesn't cover something, they're weaseling out of paying. As if literally everything and anything should be covered rather than acknowledging that there is a contract involved with very specific details about what is not covered. People don't understand there is a math equation regarding risk. Example, you can buy flood insurance but it's separate because it's expensive to cover everyone. The mathematical models are built to their advantage. In the aggregate, when they misprice risk, which is their entire business, they jack up your rates because of it or drop you instead of eating the difference for existing customers and repricing for new customers. There's really no downside for them. And that ignores the mandated insurance policies, such as auto, that people are legally forced to purchase. Government-sponsored profit mechanisms are the definition of weasel scams. Next, you'll tell me big banks care about businesses. Hint, they care about your money, not your business. Banks are another government-sponsored profit mechanism, fractional reserve lending. I guess years and years modeling for largest financial institutions and insurance companies in the world means I don't know what I'm talking about though. LOL. Yeah, no idea why this is being upvoted. Riot and vandalism is covered by most commercial policies. These people will have to pay deductibles, but this is all covered if they actually bought insurance. Okay, yes, it's covered, but do you think commercial deductibles are cheap or something? They're not, but is anyone ever mad at the covered peril? Do people often get upset at fire? Just depends on the situation really. Generally people are upset when they are involved in an accident and have to pay a deductible. I've been on the other end of that phone numerous times. I'm sure businesses are upset that they have to pay where something was out of their control. A lot of businesses are also self-insured, Enterprise for example. Not to mention, Target will be able to pay it, but Mr. Donut and your local cell phone repair store owned by small businessmen may have already been struggling in this economic downturn. So what's the alternative? Insurance companies absolutely exist to earn a profit for their shareholders. They are also contractually bound to pay for covered claims. Would you prefer the insurance mechanism to not exist and if your house burns down, well, fuck you? Or would you prefer that someone designs an insurance mechanism that accepts all risks, prices them appropriately, pays all claims and doesn't make a profit? Let the government run it. Sounds fun and effective. Just because something is a bad risk, becomes a bad risk, or moves out of a carrier's appetite doesn't mean the carrier exists to screw the client. They are simply choosing to no longer do business with that client. The client can go elsewhere. There is no such thing as an uninsurable risk if enough premium is collected. Or would you prefer that someone designs an insurance mechanism that accepts all risks, prices them appropriately, pays all claims and doesn't make a profit? Let the government run it. Sounds fun and effective. You jest, but that's how auto insurance works in 4 Canadian provinces. It works pretty well, all things considered. Manitoba Public Insurance and Saskatchewan Government Insurance provide good all-risks coverage at reasonable prices, and Société d'Assurance d'Automobiles de Quebec does a good job at providing injury coverage for Quebecers. Physical damage and non-injury liability coverages are private. The Insurance Corporation of British Columbia nearly collapsed after being looted by the previous provincial government, but it seems to be getting its feet back under itself again under the current government. Despite this, there is still a lot of complaining about the government insurer in all of these jurisdictions. Some people will always be unhappy. Yeah, but here in the US our government isn't that efficient. Speaking to Canada, I know insurance is generally predatory AF and the state's combined ratio for optional coverage tends to be in the 80% region, e.g., personal property. When you keep in mind that insurance is primarily for large unforeseen losses, that profit margin is basically irrelevant for the peace of mind. The fact that the product is provided at a profit is irrelevant. You can either afford for have your house's value in liquid assets, or you can't. There's really no in between for the layman. I'd like to disagree with your comment on insurance in the States being generally predatory AF. It is a highly regulated industry. Each state has its own regulations that insurance companies must follow. Yes, there are some subprime companies. The vast majority are above board though. It is not their fault that a large number of customers only shop for the lowest premium. The customer looks to pay the least they can, then are surprised when the insurance only covers for the items they were being paid to cover. Every customer is provided with the policy that outlines exactly what is covered. It is up to the consumer to read what their policy says. I've worked mainly auto and just a little property on the claims side. I, and the other adjusters I've worked with, will look to try and find any coverage I can to try help a customer. Believe it or not, there is no matrix I've ever been judged by from a company on how much I've paid out or covered. I do need to have proper documentation to support any payments I issue out. If a customer cannot provide some form of documentation to support a claim, I can't pay it. It's just that simple. Are you familiar with how claims are adjusted in other countries? The concept of utmost good faith is extremely weak in the US, and you would not say insurance is strictly regulated there if you have a frame of reference, and yes, I am speaking generally as I won't pretend to know the state-to-state nuances. From extensive reading on this sub and in case law, I think it's indisputable to say that conditions and exclusions of an insurance policy are enforced much more strictly in the US, or at least, there is the capacity for them to be, and that the underwriting practices permitted are much more punitive by comparison to those in Canada, comparing major companies to major companies. Burden of proof is shared equally, which in practice means that the insured's testimony is often enough to satisfy their side, while the insurer needs conclusive evidence, e.g., I drank 2 bottles of whiskey that night but I was good to drive, is almost irrelevant without a breathalyzer, on the insured and insurer, to the extent where the majority of the coverage exclusions are rarely enforceable in practice for Canadian policies. In most cases it's a rubber stamp for coverage. Some claims will always be denied or go in ways the customer does not like, but the proportion of those claims and how those claims are allowed to affect a policy is on a totally different level. I've seen the opposite. A lot of people claiming insurance companies are trash and won't cover it or anything. A lot of people don't like insurance companies. I don't work in insurance, so I'm trying to give people good sources from Google to show a standard policy will likely cover the damage. But that people need to read their damn policy. People never read their policy, it seems. I'm sitting here going, you're buying this for when it hits the fan, so you should know what you're buying. Even if premiums go up, for a lot of people they won't have a choice. They can't afford to rebuild, so they'll have to file with insurance. Insurance sellers have to purchase insurance for unintended mistakes. It's called errors and omissions. But the biggest issue is people don't read what they purchase. I'm in an area that has some pretty serious flooding back in May/early June. The amount of people that say their insurance is screwing them, etc., is alarming. I work for an agency that prides themselves on education. We go over with our clients what they're covered and not covered for. There's so many agents/agencies out there that hand their insured a policy and say, you're all set. So the normal consumer thinks they're covered for everything, but they're not. Read your policy, people. I'm assuming you mean this in regard to business owners attempting to physically defend their businesses from the looting, so please correct me if that is wrong. Coming from the commercial underwriting side and even being a fervent Second Amendment/self-defense advocate, I respectfully disagree and submit this is exactly what insurance is for. Using Dallas as an example, better to incur a $500 deductible while the carrier pays for property in a covered cause of loss than to incur a rock in the skull, God knows how long in an ICU, possibly loss of life, and a $500 deductible when the business gets destroyed just the same. The damage to the businesses from the riots and premium increases are relatively fixed in this equation. Even if they successfully go rooftop rifle Korean and defend their business from any destruction while all others are still looted, their premiums will go up just the same the following year when every carrier's internal profitability modeling deems them rate inadequate because of the total book of business not making money. To your point about lacking coverages from those who did not buy property or business income, I feel terrible for those business owners and hope the government subsidizes relief for damages they played a part in letting happen. It's still not worth the loss of life these business owners are risking. What about the exclusion for riot or civil commotion? What exclusion is that, exactly? All 3 of the most common commercial property forms include riot and civil commotion as a covered peril. Well, not the special form, but it's not excluded, so it's covered. And the ISO commercial auto form includes it as a peril under the comprehensive coverage, and that's repeated almost word for word in the personal auto form, albeit personal auto is much more likely to be a proprietary form. Can you link top an example of the exclusion that you're talking about? I've never seen one and would love to see how it's worded. I'm not going to link the proprietary form my company uses, too much personal info included. We're a national carrier but choose to service a niche P&C heavy market. But rereading the form, ours is for vacant buildings. So not as applicable as I thought. The following causes of loss are excluded for vacant buildings: riot and civil commotion. I don't have access to our basic and broad form at home, so I don't have the definition for the COL. I think they're targeting vandalism specifically and are just making sure there is no room between vandalism and riot for an aggressive lawyer to find. For vacant buildings. Is that part of the vacant clause? Yes. What about non-vacant buildings? But rereading the form, ours is for vacant buildings. Implying that it's still a named peril or not excluded depending on the COL form we use. I think that it's pretty safe to say that's an uncommon exclusion and one that's only narrowly applied. Unless your company's proprietary forms vary significantly from ISO on this coverage, I doubt that you're excluding coverage for non-vacant buildings or business interruption. Thanks for explaining your perspective. The fact that most people think that insurance is a scam shows how much the public is misinformed on insurance. It's said when I tell people what I do and all they do is complain about how insurance steals their money. Sad.
If you enjoyed this week's effective way to waste time, hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. If you are enjoying the series, leave me a comment below. A special shout out to the content creators. You frickin' rock.